सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
It's quite likely that you've been sitting up late in the night watching the live coverage of Prime Minister Modi's state visit to Washington. A lot of important things have happened and we have a lot of things to look at, and I bet by now you are also quite overwhelmed with what is going on. There was the Prime Minister's speech to the joint session of the House and Senate. Very interesting, very important. There was a joint appearance by the two leaders, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. They also took a couple of questions from the media. There were other statements before that. So a lot has been coming out. Now, what is it that we talk about in this episode of Cut the Clutter? I have picked for you what looks to me like maybe the most complex and boring thing of all. Most complex and boring because speeches are always interesting. Public statements, whether in a press conference or elsewhere or maybe on the sidelines of something or at an event, are more fun, more interesting. There are more quotable quotes. But when you look at joint statements of leaders, usually you would think, these will be anodyne, filled with platitudes, filled with diplomatic jargon, and not worth my time. Not worth my time unless I am preparing to appear for UPSC. Jokes apart, if you look at this joint statement, it is 58 para joint statement. It's not a small joint statement. It's a 58 para joint statement. If you look at it, it looks daunting to begin with. And I also thought so. I thought before I started doing this, all right, I will go lock horns with this joint statement and let me see if I can find something interesting in it. Something. But the fact is, while it has the usual anodyne, diplomatic jargon, etc. stuff, it has a lot of important elements to it, a lot of stories. In fact, it has so many stories. I just went to my newsroom and I said, this joint statement, actually, don't dismiss it with a cursory reading. This is bristling with stories. The expression I used in my newsroom, it's bristling with stories. Stories that will now be followed up by our defense and security team. Also stories that will be followed. In fact, the largest number of stories out of this joint statement will be followed by our science team of Sandhya Ramesh and Mohana Basu. Sandhya is in Bangalore, Mohana is in Delhi, and lots of other stories in this. So what I've done now for you is, I've listed out a few very interesting highlights from something which is least likely to have been read by any of us, right? Because speeches we all watched, press conference we all watched, social media is full of stuff from the speeches, press conference, even on what President Obama said on the sidelines of this in his interview with Christiana Manpur. But this is the document which is key to these negotiations, key to this summit. And that is what I have read up for you, and I am now reading straight from the document in many places, many of the highlights that I have taken here. So first of all, if you just look at the opening para of the document, see how many keywords feature in the opening para. In the opening para itself, para 1, there is India and US. India and US are among the closest partners in the world. So the importance of the relationship is right there. Then it defines the partnership in the same opening para. A partnership of democracies looking into the 21st century with hope, ambition, confidence. Platitude, you might be quite right to dismiss it as, but see what follows. What follows there is another keyword, and that keyword is US-India comprehensive global and strategic partnership, right? Then it goes on with platitudes and promises, etc., and then comes up with other keywords: human rights, shared principles of democracy, freedom and rule of law. Now, there's been a lot of talk about human rights. 70 senators and Congress members have written a joint letter to President Biden to raise these issues with Prime Minister Modi. These issues feature in the very preamble of this joint statement. And then it turns immediately within the same para to the keywords on the strategic side. So it says, Our cooperations will serve the global good as we work through a range of multilateral and regional groupings, particularly the Quad. So the Quad features in the very first para itself to contribute towards, so Quad is the next keyword, and then to contribute towards a free, open, inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific. Yet another keyword, and then it uses a very interesting line. It says, no corner of human enterprise is untouched by our partnership between our two great countries, which spans the seas to the stars, right? You know, the Chinese and the Pakistanis say relationship deeper than the oceans, higher than the Himalayas. This one is defining the relationship as spanning the seas to the stars. Then you come to the operative part. Again, you come to the operative part. The important thing is that the first section in the joint statement is not about strategic issues, it's not about economic issues, it's not about political issues, it's about technology. So that tells you qualitatively where the India-US relationship is now going and how the two countries are now privileging technology over the other issues, terrorism, strategic affairs, politics, economics, trade, etc., etc. Because America is a tech power, India is an aspiring tech power with a large body of human resources. So under the headline charting a technology partnership for the future, the two countries have talked about, they've held the inauguration of the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology, ISET. We spoke about it just the other day in our episode on over the agreement of GEF 414 engines. Both leaders first hailed the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology, that is ISET, as a major milestone, and then they go on to talk about some specifics. For example, they welcome the decision of NASA and ISRO to develop a strategic framework for human spaceflight cooperation by the end of 2023. So Indian astronauts will now be trained in America. They'll be given advanced training at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, and after that NASA and ISRO will work together on a joint mission to the International Space Station, and that will happen in 2024. Again, there is something that I am leaving out for our Science Bureau to handle because this is really beyond my ability and out of my syllabus, so to say. The leaders celebrated the delivery of NASA-ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar Satellite, or NISAR. Now, this has been delivered to India. Now, this is something, the importance of which one of my colleagues from our Science Bureau will explain to you and how it works. But the fact is that this is now going to be launched, fully made operational in India in 2024, and from what I understand, this will be a big tech leap for ISRO and also for the Indian space program. And then the joint statement goes on to talk about the MOU that both countries have already signed on semiconductor supply chain innovation partnership, and then lists some specific things. Again, each one of these is a story for our bureaus. You will read these next couple of days. And then the leaders go on to talk about proposals to train more of Indian engineers, particularly a specific proposal by a company called Lam Research to train 60,000 Indian engineers through their Semiverse Solution Program to accelerate India's semiconductor education and workforce development goals. That means once you have the human resources, then you can make a larger leap in the area of semiconductors. And also an announcement by Applied Materials, that's an American company, to invest $400 million to establish a collaborative engineering center in India. Then there is stuff about going from 5G to 6G, collaboration going towards 6G. And then something again which I don't understand very well, which is quantum coordination mechanism to facilitate collaboration among industry, academia and government to work towards a comprehensive quantum information science and technology agreement. Once again, you need specialist science reporters like ours to give us a more comprehensive idea of what it is. But generally, I can see that this leads to AI, artificial intelligence research. In fact, AI or artificial intelligence features in several of the paras that follow. So you can see what are the areas India in particular is interested in, because America is very far ahead in that field. And in science today, science and technology, this is the cutting edge area of research, and it's important that it finds so much mention and such substantive mention in this joint statement. The same para then goes on to talk about high performance computing facilities in India. It says that President Biden also reiterated his government's commitment to work with the US Congress to lower barriers to US exports to India of high performance computer technology and source code, right? That is really getting into the cutting edge areas, and these are areas where export from the US is very tightly restricted. So for the US to open this out to India is going to be a very big deal, and the US side, the statement says, pledged to make its best efforts in support of India's Center for Development of Advanced Computing, CDAC, joining the US Accelerated Data Analytics and Computing, that is ADAC Institute. Now, these are very important areas of progress. In my view, these look more important and with more comprehensive and diverse long-term implications than just that engine co-production in India. Going on with science, once again there is collaboration on nuclear science. Remember, until about 30 years ago, India was under the worst possible sanctions, particularly on the nuclear science areas from the US and the Western world. The leaders also welcomed the commencement of construction of a laser interferometer gravitational wave observatory, or LIGO, in India. Once again, it is something that we'll tell you about in the course of time. But you can see that these are areas in which India was subject to American sanctions for such a long time. And these are areas where the two countries are now collaborating, working together at the most sensitive levels. And this is where America has a lot more to give to India. And this is where India does need a lot of help as well. A lot of help and a lot of openness. On the jet engines, we've read a lot about. In fact, that's a story on which my colleague Snehesh Alex Philip has led the coverage in the entire Indian media. He broke the story first. So the joint statement says, in fact, it acknowledges the fact, underlines the fact that this engine's co-production actually will enable greater transfer of US jet engine technology than ever before, right? The US has not transferred this level of engine technology to anyone before that, although, mind you, Sweden makes the Gripen fighter aircraft which uses the same engine. Then it says President Biden and Prime Minister Modi also welcomed India's emergence as a hub for maintenance and repair for deployed US Navy assets. So US Navy assets, which particularly when they are deployed in the Indo-Pacific areas, now use a lot of the Indian Navy's maintenance, repair and overall MRO facilities, and the idea is now to expand these. Again, the leaders welcome the setting up of one more initiative which cuts between science and defense, and that is called US-India Defense Acceleration Ecosystem, or INDUS-X. It's a network of universities, startups, industry and think tanks, and will facilitate joint defense technology innovation and co-production of advanced defense technologies. And then it goes on to say very significantly that the US Department of Defense's Space Force has signed its first international cooperative research and development agreement, the first international cooperative research and development agreement with two Indian startups, right? Indian startups 114 AI and 3 RDI Tech. Now, these are not startups I know something about, but these are some things that we'll be hearing more about as we go along. Both these companies, the statement says, will work with General Atomics to co-develop components using cutting-edge technologies in AI. I told you, AI will keep featuring again and again, AI and semiconductors respectively. Then, of course, the acknowledgement of the new Predator drones to India, MQ-9B, HAIL UAVs. HAIL is high altitude, long endurance, right? These drones can stay up in the air for a long time, and I'm sure by this time you know everything about them. But what this also marks out is the fact that these drones will be assembled in India, and India will also set up an MRO facility for these drones, or the manufacturers will set up an MRO facility, that is a maintenance, repair and overall facility for these drones in India. That hopefully will lead to development of skills and infrastructure in India to produce things like this in future by itself. Then we move on to the long section, a fairly detailed section on clean energy transmission and environmental issues. As we know, with Biden administration, that's a big issue, and Modi government has also made certain commitments at the various COP summits, and Prime Minister Modi also said in his speech to the joint session of US House and Senate that India has been, of all G20 countries, India is the only one which has kept its commitment. So this is an area of priority for both countries. So there are many things said there, but I noticed a few things. I noticed, for example, names of certain Indian companies mentioned. The leaders welcomed India's VSK Energy's announcement to invest up to $1.5 billion to develop a new vertically integrated solar panel manufacturing operation in the United States. This is an Indian company making a multi-billion-dollar investment in solar panel manufacturing in the US. And then there is also a commitment by US Agency for International Development, that's USAID, to support Indian Railways' ambitious target to become a net zero carbon emitter by 2030. The Prime Minister in fact mentioned this in his press conference. Not the US help with this, but he said that Indian Railways are going to be zero net emitters by 2030, and in trying to try and explain how large Indian Railways is, he said one way to try and understand how large Indian Railways' scale of operation is, imagine that every day all the population of Australia, or a population or a number of people the size of the population of Australia, travels in Indian Railways. So that will be the big transition in India, and that's where America is going to get involved also. And there is also the mention of some kind of an American assistance or collaboration for producing and deployment of 10,000 made in India electric buses, again with the target of reducing emissions. There are also many interesting things said in key areas that lie on the cusp of security, defense and science. For example, critical minerals. Now, critical minerals or rare earths, these are things we talk about often. Many of these have applications in electronic manufacture. They are critical to electric vehicle manufacture, which is a big thing right now. They are also critical to many modern weapons, aircraft, missiles and things like that. For a long time now, China has been dominating that field. One, China is exploring and finding a lot of its own. Second, the Chinese have been going and buying up these assets in many countries, particularly weaker countries, Africa, Latin America, like that. Right now, the US has set up something called MSP, that is not minimum support price, something called MSP, which is Mineral Security Partnership. So several friendly countries friendly around the US have joined in, particularly Western countries, and the idea now is to develop critical minerals and also to protect critical minerals and also not to let them become somebody's monopoly. So India is the latest entrant to this grouping, and the joint statement, the American side welcomes India being the newest partner in this MSP to accelerate the development of diverse and sustainable critical energy mineral supply chains globally, while agreeing to the principles of MSP, including environmental, social and governance standards. So that is one more very important grouping, strategically important grouping, which India has joined in now. Now, Indo-US nuclear deal was finalized and signed in 2008. And that is something which nearly led to the fall of the Manmohan Singh government, but he took a risk, took it to parliament and won that vote of confidence. Now, many of the critics of the deal who've been smarting since then, they've been saying, all right, the deal happened, but no additional nuclear energy has come as a consequence of this. Now, those of us who argued for the deal said that this wasn't just about energy, this was basically about bringing about a fundamental shift to India's strategic worldview, because until the Cold War, India was in the Soviet camp. After the Cold War, India was a bit lost. India knew that there was no Soviet camp. At the same time, there was a shyness when it came to engaging more with the US and the Western side. But again, the criticism that no additional nuclear power came as a result of the nuclear deal. Some of that is being addressed in this joint statement as well. The leaders, for example, noted ongoing negotiations between the Nuclear Power Corporation of India and Westinghouse Electric Company of America for the construction of 6 nuclear reactors in India, right? And the next sentence, it says they welcome intensified consultations between the US Department of Energy and the Indian Department of Atomic Energy for facilitating opportunities for Westinghouse to develop a techno-commercial offer for the Kovada nuclear project. This is a plant to come up in Andhra, in fact in Srikakulam district. This will have 6 units that Westinghouse is planning to construct there, 6 units of totaling up to more than 6,000 megawatts. So it does look like that there is movement in this area as well. When it comes to the strategic areas, the strategic partnership, a lot of it is reiteration of familiar positions that both countries have. On Ukraine, on free, peaceful and open Indo-Pacific, on the importance of the Quad, and both have expressed concern over coercive actions and rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific without naming China, of course, but अकलमंद को इशारा काफ़ी है. Everybody knows what they are talking about, and also respect for international laws of the seas, or what is called as United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, UNCLOS, and the maintenance of freedom of navigation and overflight. Now, there is a little bit of an irony there that the President of America, in a joint statement with the Prime Minister of India, is underlining the importance of UNCLOS and why UNCLOS should not be violated, whereas America has not yet ratified UNCLOS. It has recognized UNCLOS as an international law of the seas. That's why there is an element of hypocrisy. But you know what? When you are the world's preeminent power by a long distance, you can afford a little bit of hypocrisy, or more than a little bit of hypocrisy. Now, both have again said what you would expect them to say on terrorism, although specific mention of many Pakistan-based groups, and also the need to bring to justice perpetrators of 26/11 in Bombay and Pathankot, etc. Again, concern over the use of UAVs or drones by terrorists. All these are important factors in the joint statement. By the time we get to para 36, we'll come back to shared values of freedom, democracy, human rights, inclusion, pluralism and equal opportunities for all citizens. And it says both countries have a tradition of recognizing the diversity represented in their nations and celebrating the contribution of all their citizens. They reasserted the democracy, freedom and the rule of law as the shared values, etc., etc., etc. So it does look like that the letter that 70 senators and congresspersons jointly wrote to President Biden to bring up these concerns with Prime Minister Modi, that letter did work. And President Biden did bring up these points in his conversations with Prime Minister Modi, though of course he would not have done it, he would certainly not have done it as sharply as former President Barack Obama suggested he should do in his conversation, in his interview with Christian Amanpour. In fact, that Obama interview sparked the thought process which led to this week's national interest. So please do watch out for it.